Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to our podcast. Podcast today is about the issue of the hostage deal. Is it good? Is it bad? How does it jive with Israeli democracy, with democracy in general? How does it jive with morals and ethics? Is it good for Israel? Is it bad for Israel? Is it bad for the West? What will happen in the future? Should we have taken the hostage deal, or should we have opposed it? So I'd like to start first, ladies first, Olga. So please, if you have any comments, please say anything you'd like to say.
Well, I think it is one of the toughest questions out there right now. And as the famous Scandinavian author called this book, it's a sophist choice, meaning whichever decision we would have made, I think it would have been a wrong one, right? There's no other way but to do one wrong. There's absolutely no question that the rationale of this country and the fabric of which this country is made and these people is to make sure that every person is returned home safely. And this is a tragedy of the entire country and of the entire Jewish people. So I don't think there's anyone here who doesn't want to see the hostages return safely home. At the same time, it begs the question of at what price and what have we achieved so far? The over 800 soldiers that fell, and what does that also do for the reality on the ground moving forward, given all the hundreds of terrorists that will be released and the pain that it is causing to the families whose loved ones were murdered in the most savage way by these terrorists that are being released. So I don't think there's one right or wrong question. I think all parties are right, sadly. And I think it also perfectly captures at least to my mind, the sentiments that prevail in Israel these days, which is the combination of tremendous pain and tremendous joy at the same time. And you just cannot decide which one, takes over when. I really don't think there's a right or wrong answer.
So, Russell, what do you think about that? Do you agree or disagree? What do you think?
I think I'll be one of the definitions of a deal is that to make a deal is that no party is getting 100% of whatever their point is, and we've been put into a situation, right or wrong, and we could take ourselves back and want to know how we got it, but we're in a situation, and when you have to make a deal, any deal you make is always a compromise. That's why you have a deal. That's the definition of the word deal. I think it's very hard for all of us to put our hearts and our minds into the families of the hostages. What is the right deal for them? What is the right deal for a family who has lost a loved one as a soldier? What is the right deal for a political entity? What is the right deal for the state of Israel, for the nation of Israel? All of those can always be questions. That's why a deal is always questioned. Nobody ever is 100% happy about a deal. But what I believe the responsibility that we have is that once you put yourself into the hands of the politicians and the military, is that you have to accept those decisions, and then you have to figure out how to make the best out of that deal for us. And so the deal is never good. It's a shame that we had to be put into the deal, but I can't deal with yesterday. I only can deal with today and tomorrow. And for me, it's about how do we make it the best deal for us for tomorrow.
True. It's a very hard decision. From a halachic point of view, from the Jewish law point of view, a thing called immediate danger and potential danger. So the great Avad Yosef said the following when he came to the situation years ago with Gilad Shalit and so forth. What do we do? And he said, listen, right now a Jewish soul is in trouble, is in danger. That what will happen, let's say a year from now with all the released terrorists, we don't know. But we have to save them at this particular moment. Nevertheless, with all what we're going to do, and we're saving people, and that's wonderful, and it's commendable, and it's heartbreaking that so many lives are lost to save these unfortunate hostages. Still, we're living in the Middle East. We're living in the world of terror. Do we, so to speak, in the end of the day, does the ends justify the means? Because as you mentioned before, that both you mentioned, what will happen that in the future, the terrorists will be more encouraged to do such acts. Do we look from that perspective? Or do we say, no, we have to save the lives? Now, the reason I'm asking this question is because of anti-Semitism. Can we win this game of anti-Semitism? Damn we do, damn we don't. What do you think? Start with you, Russell.
No, I don't think there's a game to win with anti-Semitism, and I use the word anti-Jewish. I think anti-Jewish is anti-Jewish. I don't intend to win the game with anti-Jewish. What I do know is that I will win the game of being Jewish. And I think that, again, that's what's incumbent upon us. Yes, we live in the Middle East, and yes, we live in a tough world. And it's only been that way for like 3,700 years. So the reality is that how do we rise? What is our standard? Who are we? How do we continuous to be the winning people? I'm a big believer that we have been the winningest group of people on the face of the earth. You can't compete with us. We've given more to democracy, to arts and science, to love, and to marriage, into the books, into ethics, into morals, and to mathematics, and to anything you want. Well, the Jewish people have been part of it. So the winning game that we have to win is the winning game of the Jewish people, and why the Jewish people want to be part of this winning team. And so I'm not going to win over my haters. They're going to be there, and I could care less about them, and I waste no time on them. And anybody that wastes time on haters, I will tell you, you go to a protest, and that one person who's going to go to the protesters, because for that 35 seconds that they're going to have they're going to educate the protesters about why they are wrong. I have no need to educate my haters. I do have a need to energize the people that are part of me and the people who want to be part of us. And that's the game to win.
Olga, being the chair of the Zionist committee, and now the hostage deal and so forth, do you think that's best to focus only on the Jewish aspect of it, or to focus also on the fact what the non-Jews will see?
So I think there's always two sides to a coin. On Shabbat, when when the four hostages were returned, they actually brought them to the Beilinson Hospital, which is about a few kilometers away from where I live. And the entire community here was on their feet, celebrating, talking about it. The word spread through the synagogues and the shuls. And I took my 7-year-old son by foot to the Beilinson Hospital. And we were there with a few hundreds of Israelis with flags and songs and such excitement in the air to welcome them when the helicopter landed, and they welcomed them. And my little son was so excited. I cannot find the right words to explain the excitement. It was a combination of, him having heard all the things that he has heard in the last 15 months about the hostages and everything, but also the shared excitement by the people around him. And the morning after, on our way to school, he looks at me, and he's 7, and he says to me, Mommy, the Jewish people puzzle is a little bit more complete now. And to me, that is probably one of the most significant lessons that I could have indirectly taught him in terms of what does it mean to be Jewish and responsible for each other. What does it mean to live in this country? What does it mean to be a Zionist? What does it mean to be part of a community? What does it mean to be compassionate, to welcome and to rejoice in a collective manner? So in that sense, I do agree with Russell. I think we need to capture that, and we need to always, and this is what we always do as Jews, we have to turn this into a positive engine. of something more that will become of it, of something that, and even October the 7th and everything that has happened since cannot be just another stain in our history. I mean, that's the point of us learning from the history and doing better in each round. It's like a boxing match. But it's not only about us. That's internally, in terms of our community. Externally, I do think we need to demand that the international community, dictated by us or demanded by us, changes the paradigm, shifts something conceptually in how they approach this. Everything about this deal boils down to the question, when all these terrorists are returned to Gaza, and now that there is a ceasefire, what is the reality in Gaza, but not only in Gaza, in the entire Palestinian society? Is Hamas back in power? Is the same collective hatred going to again rule the society there? And how do we prevent another October the 7th happening again? And in that sense, I think there's an inwards fight in strengthening our community, and there's an outwards looking fight in terms of demanding that the international community, and they're already throwing billions of dollars in humanitarian aid, Gaza, conditions that aid to a few things. One, they have to recognize our right to be here. It's that simple. It really is that simple. It's the lowest common denominator in our homeland. And number two, we must not allow the terrorist-affiliated people or radical people spreading hate, anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, and sheer hatred rule that society again. If we don't demand these things, then we haven't achieved any. We're just going to go back to the same reality. And then it's a question of when the next round will occur and not whether it will occur. So to me, it's a twofold challenge that lays ahead of us, but both require steadfast leadership and a clear vision of where we want to take it.
You know, if October 7th happened in the 75th year of Israel's independence, the truth of the matter is October 7th was waiting to happen from day one. From day one, Israel was created. October 7th was going to happen one day. It took 75 years for one day till we let down our guard, and it occurred. So, you mentioned before October 7th happening over and over again. It's always there. It's always going to be there if you're going to have this extreme hatred from the Muslim world against us, and also the non-Muslim world. But let's be honest about it. Part of Islamic ideology does not accept Jewish sovereignty, just as against the sovereignty concept of having the second-class citizen, be it Christian, be it Jewish, they're having their own state, especially the Jewish state. But nonetheless, if we're going to have a democratic state, people always mention that the idea of democracy, you have to be a higher moral level. But then the idea of morals and ethics of democracy is to uplift the individual. And we can't be in a situation whereby we let the evildoer, the hater, so to speak, decide our policy. When they use our morality against us, that becomes immoral in the end. So the question is, from our Jewish experience, where do we turn the tide? You mentioned before about demanding that we should exist, that this is our country, this is our reason, this is for our being. But before also, Russell, you mentioned the fact that we, the Jews, have given the world so many things, and yet it's almost 3,300 years plus, and with everything we give to the world, they still hate us, they still don't recognize us, we're aliens in the world, we're people from another planet, and they don't want to accept us. So when do we finally say to the world, we're going to take care of ourselves, enough's enough with you, because no matter what, you won't accept us. Do we do that? Don't do that, especially what happened the last year and a half. And the fact that hostage deal shows that even what we've done right now, the world still doesn't recognize it. Yesterday it happened at the Holocaust Memorial, and the President of Ireland gave us criticism. So question, how do we balance that? Do we shut off ourselves to the world, or do we continue? We find a balance there as well. Russell, what do you think?
I think you've answered the question with the question. The answer is that why have we existed? And we didn't exist by lowering our ethics and lowering our morals. We did not exist by lowering ourselves to somebody else. We exist because, and take the Holocaust, 6 million Jews, 6 million Jews slaughtered, killed. Yet I don't know a Jewish grandmother, a Jewish mother, who ever told any child to hate a German, who told you to go kill another German, who told you that we should wipe out the Germans. The point is of the story is that, yeah, things happen. And the reason that we have so many years on so many people is because of our higher ethics and morals and our standards as a people. And that we have also shown and I think the Olga story about taking her child to go see the hostages being released in the hospital. What a tool, what an opportunity that it wasn't to take it to a museum. It wasn't just, it was to go show how one person coming home, 3 people coming home, 4 people coming home. It didn't matter, they were coming home. And it was such a moment that a mother thought it was so special to take her child to do nothing more than to visualize it. That is why our children are going to grow up to be better children. And that's why we are better people. I'm not going to tell you that we shouldn't be vigilant against our haters. Of course, that's why Israel, after coming into existence, that we won't have 6 million Jews. Because 6 million Jews were, listen, if you follow Hitler, he was willing to trade the Jews and sell the Jews. There was no place for them to go. Nobody wanted them. So now we have a land of Israel and a state of Israel. That won't happen. Will the October 7th catastrophes, they happen to different people. When 9/11 happened in America, there's realities. The point is rise above, know who we are, and know that we'll exist in another 3,300 plus years because of our morals and our ethics and our standards, and taking a mother or taking to a child to go see a release of a hostage.
But nonetheless, still, part of our morals and ethics, it says, those who are kind to the cruel will be cruel to the kind. That happens too. We learn as well the story of Haman from the story of Esther. Originally, before, King Saul was very, very, very kind to his great-grandfather, the grandfather of Haman. And Haman was later on produced, and he almost committed a worldwide genocide. So we have that morals, ethics doesn't mean also being a pacifist. You have to know when to balance it. The question is now, will you see what's happening in Israeli society? It was a very big conflict. That some were against it, some were for it. Nonetheless, how as we, the Jewish people, and the war has torn a lot of people, even those in the extreme left, that they don't want anymore to have, let's say, Berry. They don't want to have anymore the idea of helping the Gazans because they saw the Gazans were so terrible on October 7th. And when they attacked us, and also when the hostages were brought into Gaza, where do we, so to speak, find that point where we can be humane, keep our morals, at the same time be tough as nails? Because we see very clearly from the Bible itself, the book of Joshua and King David and so forth, they knew the Middle East. They weren't very, and they were very, very moral people, but they knew when to use force. That's my question. So that's the thing we have to understand also. We can't always say morals and ethics means being pacifist. So what do you think, how we can balance that? Because why? We don't want to create also Jews that still have that exile mentality, that, will be nice to the Goyim, and the Goyim will respect us in the end, because it doesn't work.
Well, I let Olga talk about. I'll tell you in a second. That's not what I'm at all. The question is that do we look at the world in one way? The answer is we look at it through the Jewish eyes. Do we become strong? We have a state of Israel. The whole idea of a creation of a state of Israel was to become strong. Because it wasn't just to return to our ancestral land. If it was just to return to our ancestral land, we wouldn't have had a war of independence. We just kind of returned there and did. How did we start the Haganah, and how did we start the Irgun? And because we understood that we had to fight for our rights, absolutely, positively. But I'll fight for our rights to the bitter end. But I'll also look at this world in the lens of a Jewish eyes that I have always known.
Excellent. And Olga, from your point
I,
of just one
I
question.
just want
Go
to,
ahead.
yeah, I just want to give my 5 cents on this. I think we already won. We have a state, and even with the tragedy of October the 7th that shook all of us to the core, right? And also sparked the global anti-Semitism. It wasn't just an Israeli experience here. I think we already won. And at the end of the day, it's a twofold question. We can look at it philosophically, and we are filming this on the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. But this day is not marked in Israel. Why? Because today is the day when the Jews were liberated from the Auschwitz. The day that we commemorate is the day when the Jewish people rebelled in the Warsaw Ghetto. And to me, that epitomizes the difference in the approach that Russell was talking about. Are we going to celebrate the victimhood and let it define us and define our future? Or are we going to celebrate the victory and our spirit of perseverance, resilience, and ultimate survival of all these civilizations that came to try and alienate us over the history, and they all failed. None of them exist today. But on a more pragmatic level, right, there's always two levels to look at it. We do have to be pragmatic and practical, because we live in a very nasty corner of the world, and we have to lead realpolitik. So on one hand, no one in the Middle East who is not strong does not survive or prevail. So clearly, no matter what, and no matter where we drive our inner strength as people, we need a strong army, we need a strong country, a strong democracy, and we need to do a better job in keeping our borders and our civilians secure than was the case on October the 6th, right? Last year. Now, at the same time, looking at the deal now and looking at the society in Israel, it's not only our decision, right? The incoming Trump administration was the one that pushed this deal to fruition. It's not to say that it wasn't for Trump, that was the only thing that did it. Like, the Biden administration was negotiating and trying, but clearly, whenever Trump came into the picture, he pushed it over the final line, right? But there are no free meals in politics, and the question is, what is the price that, like Russell said in the beginning, that's the definition of compromise. You have to pay, you have to give something in return. So it begs the question, and the returned tariffs are only part of the price that we will have to pay. We are living in times of tectonic geopolitical movements, and they are not only here in the Middle East. I mean, we're just about to start seeing whatever Trump will craft between Russia and Ukraine, or should I say Russia and Europe, or EU, because that's basically what it is, and it will have ramifications on the rest of the world. And there's a reshaping of the global map and spheres of influence right now, and we have to, on one hand, be strong, but we also have to be smart, because today wars are not only waged physically and with armies, rather with spheres of influence and economy and trade and so on. So it's a multifaceted approach that we have to run, but luckily for us, that's what we are good at, right? We are few in numbers, but we are very good at innovating ourselves and in general contributing to the civilization and taking nothing and turning it into something. Look at the country that we created. Look at even the story of Passover. You keep bringing it back to the Bible. I mean, this is what God taught us to do, to take nothing and turn it into food in the desert. And I think that is exactly what we, in a metaphorical sense, that is what we need to do.
Now, that's true. And we saw also, that I mentioned before, the Jewish country, the state, the people being torn apart. That was torn apart before October 7th. That's one of the reasons why Hamas and Hezbollah were watching the inner fighting that we had within our people. And now again, we're having the same fight again indirectly with the hostage deal. Some for it, some against it. Nonetheless, when the hostage deal is accomplished, when the war is finally, quote unquote, at its lowest, how soon do you think this rivalry between our own people, between left and right, secular and religious, will start again? Have we learned anything from that in the last 15 months? Will it be, have we have a psychological change? We had an emotional change, but do we have a psychological change? What do you think, Russell?
So I look at the world a little differently, because I think that before October 7th, and I used to give speeches on it, it was the finest moment of Zionism ever in the history of our time. 300,000 plus people for how many weeks were protesting. And by the way, I don't know if you know, Israelis are emotional. So, with emotional fervor, on both sides. And not one car burned. Not one house burned. The greatest crisis that was facing the people of Israel at that moment was they ran out of Israeli flags. And there was no flags to buy. I want you to think about it. And if you don't think that's one of the finest moments of us Jewish people that we should be celebrating, wow. And today we could have all of these concerns. And I'm going to do a plug. We're building a village called the Zionist Village in Beersheba to bring the Jewish world together, because we, not the young people, are dividing it between right and left. We are dividing it between religious and non-religious. We are dividing it between Israel and diaspora. The young people, they understand, and if we continue on the pathway of teaching about shared values and common destiny of our people, if we bring our people together, that right and left can have their own political opinion. I checked, and you could correct me because you're much more learned than me, but I understand Abraham was not a Likud and Moses was not a Laborite. That Jacob was not Yesh Atid, and King David was not Meretz. So politics is a formation of a rule of a land by democratic means, and by that definition, I think Winston Churchill said it, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. But politics isn't who we are as a Jewish people. We are about shared values. We're about common destiny. We have to celebrate it. We have to talk about it. We can, as leaders, we cannot allow that conversation to define us. But the greatest conversations of judicial reform, of hostage or no hostage and so on, wow, that we are all together as a people. What a fine moment of a Jewish people.
A very interesting point you just mentioned. That's unique unto the Jewish people, that neither the West, neither the East has that, is that we are a family. A family can argue. A family can still see each other as brother and sister. The fact that nobody in 9 months of protest made any type of war, and the tension here in Israel was very, very high, very, very high, and yet there was no violence. That's incredible. Had this been a different country, a different state, even a different time, I mean, even let's go back to the 1930s, 1940s, even here in Israel, before Israel was Israel, there was conflict between the right and the left.
Avi, 1960s, we were protesting the Vietnam War, and the National Guard shot young kids at Kent State.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? We had a protest in Minnesota, and it was terrible. A person was killed by the police, right, wrong, I'm not going to even get. And they burned down half of downtown. We had a protest in Israel with great emotion. By the way, even more emotion than what is the best cafe afuch. Mm-hmm. And guess what? The only bonfire, by the way, was during Lag Bomer, and it was such a Jewish bonfire, they were cooking potatoes.
Right. Oh, look, BLM, what happened in the United States just a few years ago. What happened to all the protests with the BLM protests? Cities were burned down, and here nothing happened. There's something unique with the Jewish people.
I don't think it's about the people. I think the people, and this is we are made of this fabric. We are the people of ideas, and we're always going to fight inside of our own camp for a better idea, And we're all of us each one of us is a leader. So we so strongly believe in, our ideas, and we're going to fight. I think the challenge for our country is a challenge of leadership. It is a challenge of, the Israeli government and the Israeli Knesset finding ways to not quiet down all these ideas and conversations, but rather.
So continuing that question, what are we going to do to prevent or to help our Jewish brothers and sisters to learn from this lesson, to create more unity, and to not have the influence of the Hamasniks and the other ones to turn Jews against themselves, happening in different aspects in college campuses?
Let's be leaders. We have to be leaders. It's, when I keep blaming us, I believe organized Jewish world, I believe leadership. If things fail, it's not the followers' fault. The majority of the world is made up of followers, Avi, and it is a matter of us. It's a matter of Avi and Russell, Olga's, and the rest of the people. And what are we going to do? And make sure that we stand up and that we're talking and that we're making things happen. But when you see young people who have, people say, well, they've disassociated with Judaism. No young person disassociated with anything. It was because we as leaders didn't we didn't keep them in the tent. We didn't bring them along. We didn't excite them. I go back to my winning formula. If we want to keep talking about the losing world, I know this is always going to sound controversial, but Judaism is kind of like a sports team. And if you like Hapoel Tel Aviv, Yerushalayim, whatever it may be, and you love them, and you buy their scarves, and you paint your face, and you buy season tickets, but they are always losing, you still love them, but you start watching them on TV. And then when you watch them on TV, they're losing, and you change the channel. So when we are a winning people, but we don't tell our people about our winning season and our winning games and how great we are, you'll watch it at home. And if you watch it at home, you start changing the channel. And so it's what is going to happen? It's up to us, the leaders, to stand up and lead and to tell people and to talk to each other and to profess about the greatness that we've accomplished and to work together. And yes, to fight, because it's part of who we are, is to debate. As like Olga said, we're made to debate. You can't learn, Judaism is all set about learning Torah with a partner, because, you gotta, why can't you learn it alone? And because you're not supposed to, you're supposed to debate. So let's debate. But let's also, as leaders, stand up and talk about how great we are and talk to each other.
Very good. You remind me of a story about Lubavitcher Rebbe. I myself am not Chabadnik. I heard this wonderful story of a young boy who went to visit the Rebbe, and the Rebbe asked him, what do you like? And he says, I love baseball. They asked him, when it comes to baseball and you see your team and they're losing, what do? Do you get up or you leave? Yeah, I leave. He says, why do you leave? Because, they're losing. He says, but what about the players? Did they leave? He says, no. Because why? The kid said, because they're players. They have to play until the very end. The Rebbe told him that's exactly about life. You have to play to the very end. The point is, it's what you're mentioning basically right now. As leaders, we have to do our effort and to bring the people into the tent, not to leave the tent. Now, when you mentioned the idea of debating, so Lev Schreiber, the actor, he himself said a very interesting, beautiful speech a few months ago, that October 7th reminded him of being Jewish, and he realized that for Jewish people, seeking the truth, arguing over even a sentence of the Torah, the Gemara, because they're looking for the truth, is the identity of the Jewish people. It's our reason for living. So how then, Olga, from your experience, are we able to go and swim through all the lies of anti-Semitism that is on social media and that will increase on social media, with all the ability that we have now to connect through social media, yet there's so much lies being said? I know, and we know that the amount of money that's being put into it by Qatar and other haters. Nonetheless, have you seen from your experience how we can use October 7th in a positive way to get and open the minds of Jewish people and realize that we, the Jewish people are not the bad people here. It's the opposite. We are the victims, and the world has to see that for itself and not be bullied as we were yesterday by the President of Ireland.
Well, I don't think anti-Semitism is going anywhere. Anti-Semitism is the oldest form of hatred, and I think it's always going to be there. The answer to your question is actually quite simple. It is not simple at all to implement it, but what we need to do is just one word: educate, educate, educate. We need to make sure that our community is strong and proud, that it knows its history, it knows its tradition, it knows why we are who we are, that it knows its place. We need to stop being apologetic and even expecting the non-Jews to recognize us, give us that legitimacy. We're already here. We're not going anywhere. Now is the question of how do we make sure that my kids' kids are proud Jews as well? And I think at the same time, looking towards the elected officials and, the societies by and large, we need to demand that they regulate more and more. We need to help them understand what constitutes anti-Semitism to us, and we need to insist that no one else knows that other than us. Just like you don't ask, you don't ask us what is the definition of Islamophobia. You ask the Muslim community. The same way, you cannot ask anyone who is not a representative Jewish voice to define what constitutes anti-Semitism. And then based on that, we need to demand from the different levels of the policy makers to regulate that and implement and enforce. But internally, we need to make sure that we ask the right questions. I used to be a Jewish student leader. I used to chair when I was much younger, the European Union of Jewish Students. And I remember going and speaking on I spoke at every stage of every big major Jewish organization, as the representative of the European Jewish youth. And they all referred to me back then and us as the future leaders. And I always protested. I stood on the stage and I said, I'm not a future leader. I'm the leader of today. If you want to secure tomorrow, you need to ask me now what's going to serve me in 20 years. Just like we now need to be asking the young people today, how do you need us to educate you? What resonates with you? I don't know that, and I don't regard myself as particularly old, but I think that Facebook is awesome, which I think says abundance about me. I don't have a TikTok, and the reality that the young people live today is completely different to the one that we lived. We can identify it, recognize it, understand its importance, but we cannot live it. And that is just an example. It's a metaphor for, by and large, how do they need us to provide a platform for them to learn and be proud and be part of the community. We need to give them that space, and that's a challenge. It is a challenge for the organized Jewish life. It's a challenge how you give a voice to young people who don't have the experience, they don't have the track record, they don't know how to build processes and organizations and so on. But that is the real question. On one hand, solid foundations. And you keep referring to the faith, to Torah. One of the major lessons that I ever learned in Judaism, and I keep going back to it, is Naaseh v'nishma. First you practice, and then you understand. Because a lot of it is not about understanding. Being Jewish is not, there's nothing rational about it. It is making sure that it is part of the DNA of who you are, so that nothing else makes sense to you, to your kids, and to their kids. And the truth is somewhere in there. So that, to my mind, that is the major challenge.
Several years ago, I created two apps, one called Fight BDS and BDS Mythbusters. They're using the idea of using social media. And we have to working those lines also to make more apps like that. So people have community, can talk to each other, can get advice, can relate to each other. And when they see something, when they need information, explain things quickly, open the app and they can answer, when they are challenged. The same token, as you mentioned, a very good point. What is for the youth will be in 2045, 2055, 2075. We have to see from that point of view. And things are going to change with AI and so forth. That being the case, then, Russell, from your perspective, the Jewish National Fund and what it's done for the last 100 years and so forth, does the Jewish National Fund, in terms of getting the diaspora Jew being involved with the Jew of Israel, not the Israeli Jew per se, but the Jew of Israel? Why did I say that for? Because the idea is that the connection of the land, more than just connection to the state, that having that feeling, I must live in the land. Why I bring up for? If you notice, by the way, the generation of Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, and the generation of Joshua, the two different generations. In the Torah itself, you won't be seeing that the Jews who were in Egypt saying, we must return to the land. They didn't say that. It's the opposite. Let's go back to Egypt, they said. It took Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, 40 years to inculcate and instill into the second generation the love of the land, the love to go back to Israel. How then do we now create that love again within the Jewish people that are living outside of Israel? Because they have seen, quote unquote, the 45,000 Gazans who were killed. I know that number is a ridiculous number. And we see that also now that people want to take the Gazans out of Gaza and move them away. With that, the different types of, that ideas are being approached. If that happens, and if it doesn't happen, still, what's the way, from your experience, in, I just mentioned for a sports analogy, that we're able to breach that barrier and make sure that the Jewish youth say, I want to live in Israel, this is my homeland, this is my history, this is my very root and soul.
So I think that Olga used the word educate, I'm going to use the word inspire. I'm going to use your word, Avi, love. You can have all the AIs and the apps. We as leaders have to instill love, inspiration, and education. In that, we have to talk the talk and walk the walk. And I'm going to again do a plug. We're building a village in Beersheba that we bring high school kids from America. It's something that I believe is the most important moment. I think college is great. It's just a little late. At 16 and 17 years old is when the most impressionable moments for young people. And if you look at over the past 25 years, we have gone from 19,000 teenagers, 19,000 25 years ago of 16 and 17-year-olds coming to Israel for 5 weeks or more. Before the war, we were down to 3,500. Now, why? Because teenagers are so expensive and it's hard and it's so difficult and it's hard to measure. And let's take, why do we want 5 and 8 week programs and 12-week programs? If we do 10-day programs, we can have a big kumsitz and everybody can see a big group of people coming together and we all celebrate. So I believe that we have to work harder on teenagers. So we have an American high school. Ours is Alexander Muss High School in Israel, where we're bringing before the war 1,700 teenagers. 55% came from non-Jewish day school. Here's the reality also. 95% of kids do not go to day school or yeshivot. 95%. So if we want to pretend, we can pretend, but only 5%. And by the way, that hasn't changed in 25 years, and it won't change. And it's not about money, because I'll give you another statistic. The other statistic is 48% of Jews go to day school. Not Jewish day school, but private school, which is more expensive than Jewish day school.
48%.
So those are the realities. Now let's deal with realities and inspire, love, educate young people. And let's bring them to Israel for 5 weeks, 10 weeks, 18 weeks. Our school is an 18-week program, a semester abroad. 55% of them come from non-Jewish day school. 70% of the parents have never been to Israel. Most of the kids never had a B'nai Mitzvah. They come for a lot of reasons. The educational opportunity, learning AP calculus, I really don't care. They leave with 4,000 years of Jewish history, learning it where it was written, and inspiration and love and leadership to lead our community for tomorrow. And that's what we have to spend our time, energy, and effort on is high school, high school, high school.
And from how much would this cost, such a program for people?
It costs a child $24,000 a semester.
$24,000. And can this be in terms of subsidized by the government or grants?
That's how we do it. We raise money for scholarships, but we have to bring not 1,700. We got to bring 10,000 teenagers a year. 10,000 between 16 and 17 years old for programs of 5, 7, 18 weeks. Then they learn something else. Yes, they learn the greatest history of our Jewish people, and they learn about Olga's children. And they walk the street and they talk the talk, and the relationships that they're going to make, and I use relationships, are relationships that will last a lifetime. At 8, and I got to tell you, at 22, even at 30, and for sure at 35, you don't build relationships, you build acquaintances. And I don't want us to build acquaintances, I want them to build relationships. They don't have to become this or that. They may not move to Israel, they may not be religious, they may be, but wouldn't it be nice that they have a conversation? When I go back to my shared values, common destiny, they learn about each other, they can have these kind of conversations, debate them, dialogue, but love each other, inspire each other, and educate each other.
Wonderful idea.
I just want to echo from my stance as a mother of a kid in Israel, and I wasn't born in Israel, so I can actually appreciate both perspectives, right? Of a Jew that was born in diaspora and a person raising a kid in Israel now. And I cannot decide which one is more important, actually, Russell. I think bringing the kids from diaspora to Israel, but then having them meet the Israeli kids so that they would also learn that there's a thriving Jewish life in diaspora, and it looks completely different than the Jewish life in Israel. Because my kids live in you either go to a religious school or to a secular school in Israel, and they don't always intermix throughout the education. And to see the celebration in diaspora, how both can be part of the same community, I think is equally important. And I think the program that you are building, and the village that you're building in Beersheba, and I know that the World Zionist Organization is a partnership now, and I was super happy that happened a couple of months ago. I think those are the most important things, and I can only hope that my kids will be part of such initiatives. My dream, and I don't know, I have to find such framework, is to be able to send my boys abroad during the summer to, American Jewish summer camps, so that they also, as Israelis, they can bring something as Israelis to the table, but they can also take and learn something from their peers in diaspora communities. I think that is absolutely the most important thing we can do today.
Exchange program, basically. About 10 years ago, I created a thing called Pamach Torah Teen Centers. The idea was to have a connection, those living in Israel and those living outside of Israel, through social media, whereby the youth of today would adopt someone from the youth in 1948. And then what happened was they would be talking to actual founders of 1948, the warriors of Plamach, Hagun, Shtena, Gana, and so forth. And they would see and learn from these old timers, quote unquote, because unfortunately they became names, the Plamach, the Haganah, the Stern Gang, the Lechi, and so forth. But they weren't recognized as individuals. Now, they're still alive today. And why is that so important? Because they are the first Maccabees. Now, people give great homage to the Holocaust survivors, and they deserve it so. But they forget about the first Maccabees in 2,000 years. The Pamach warriors, the Haganah warriors, the Stern warriors, the Lechi warriors, who are now in their 90s. Some of them have passed away. They're old, they're frail, no one talks to them, they're forgotten. What would someone do who had a chance to meet a Maccabee from 2,000 years ago, to do anything? And they have it now. And I asked people to help me with that. And people, no, yes, no, maybe we'll help you, not help you. And it didn't go to the level I wanted to go. And that also helped too, because why? Then people will recognize that I can connect to someone actually from 48, hear their stories. And they were young. It's the young people who made Israel a reality. Now, that being the case, then is also how important is that we learn Hebrew? Because why I mentioned this for, there's a thing in the Jewish concept called Tinok Shnishba, a baby that was captured. A child was captured by foreign enemy and then raised in that culture. The fact that all of us speak English or French or German or another language and not speak Hebrew, that means we are Tinok Shnishba. Because language changes your mentality. When you speak a certain language, the culture, the meaning, the spirit comes out. There's a different ethos in Hebrew as opposed to Yiddish, as opposed to Ladino and so forth. There was a stress once, back in the day, where people were speaking Hebrew. They were teaching that outside of Israel. My mother was born in America, but when she came to Israel in 51, she spoke better Hebrew than most people. How do we do that? In terms also that in terms from Russell, from the JNF, and from you, Olga, in terms of the Zionist Federation, that will revive Hebrew again outside of Israel.
Well, I think I'll just answer quickly, but I'll say that I think what Olga said, and Olga, the village should not be a place, by the way, for Americans or Australians or Barcelona. It should be for Beersheba and Tel Aviv and so on. So the dream is that kids will be going to school together as well and learning together, which goes to Avi, your piece. If you look at Soviet Jewry, what kept Soviet Jews Jewish? Okay, because for 75 years they were not allowed to practice, to learn songs. It was simplicity, but songs, and it was learning a Kiddush or learning the Motzi, but on a song basis. And how come so many Soviet Jews were musicians? Because they were learning the beauty of music and the beauty of Judaism. So. It is so important that from Barcelona to Beersheba to Bnei Brak to Boston, that we build a community talking to each other, that we're talking about each other, and we could say, from simplicity of Eifo Shiratim to phrases, and be able to order pizza and sit down and debate Tanakh. But that's where we as leaders have to rise up, understand, and we have to lead. The people are followers. If we as organization leaders don't stand up and lead, it is not their fault, it is our fault.
Very good.
Well, I agree 100%. And one of the leading values of the World Zionist Organization is teaching Hebrew, and Hebrew as an institution. And even in our meetings, and we are basically the Jewish Congress, right? We have Zionist federations in 36 countries around the world, which is the greatest assembly of Jewish people that one can think of nowadays. And as a matter of principle and as a matter of showcase of the values that we represent, most of the meetings are actually, we try to have them in Hebrew. There is simultaneous translation, obviously, but anyone who can is asked to do it in Hebrew because it says something. It is the ultimate, as you said, expression of what it means to live in this country and to have a Jewish homeland. And it is not the same as the ancient Hebrew. It is the modern Hebrew that is spoken in our modern homeland. So I, in general, agree with you that language, you can be the same person and speak several languages. I speak a few, and I can tell you that when I switch a language, everything about the way I think changes, because every language brings a specific way of thinking and a specific way of building a sentence and a specific sense of humor that resonates with that culture, and the music of the language, and everything is different. And I think in terms of bringing the diaspora Jews and the Israelis closer together, language is one of the most important vehicles of also understanding each other. As you say, we can speak in English, and yet so much can be lost in translation. So to me, the centrality of Hebrew is unquestionable. And I think we see it today, even when you have new immigrants moving to Israel, making aliyah. Whether they master the language is one of the most important parameters that defines how well integrated they are. If they stay in their bubble and they only speak their native language, and they stay in their community of origin, then they can live and they can survive, succeed even, but they're not necessarily becoming Israeli. It is when they master the language that the real process of being integrated into the society, and moreover, them being given a chance to shape the society, really takes place. So absolutely, there is no question that the language is important. I can tell you that raising two kids in Israel, they were both born here, and I'm married to an Israeli. But yet I insisted on teaching them Serbian, because I also understand in the other direction, they would never otherwise truly understand where I come from and what that culture brings to the table. So language is extremely, extremely important.
So going back to the concept I mentioned before, that of how we can connect modern youth with the youth of 48. Can we do something of that? Can we find a way to connect them, the two, and they can speak to each other and get inspired by the youth of 48? Because the youth of 48 is a very unique people, very unique people. I mean, they gave life and limb to create the reality we have today. One would be gratitude. Two, it would also be the idea of historical connection. Three, they would see the mindset of what it was back in 1948. What was 48? Four, also they'd realize that the majority of the warriors of 48 weren't Holocaust survivors. They were natural born Jewish people who became Israelis. Also, they would also, what it would do, by the way, in terms of reviving just gratitude for those who are now in their late 90s, basically, mid 90s. What it would revive them. If we're going to, be giving such homage and care for the Holocaust survivor, shouldn't we give also for the Jewish fighter as well? And the idea of the Zionist movement is about Ben Gurion, Baruch Katznelson, Jabotinsky, and so forth. These are actual people who knew them, so to speak, who lived with them, understood them. It would instill into the youth this incredible idealism that is in the Jewish people, but it's dormant. I mean, it has been revived since October 7th, unfortunately, but that still feeling of 48 individual is unique. My father was one of those people. My father was one of the greatest warriors of 48. He captured Hatzion, Bavawad, Bet Shemesh, and so forth. Is an amazing Pamach warrior. And the Pamach mentality is different from all other people. I'll give you an example. My father used to tell me, those who think Pamach means Pagot Machat, spirit forces, said we, the Pamachnikim, we didn't think that way. He said, Pei Lamed Mem Chet, Pamach, Po, Lo, Maznachim Chaver. Here, we don't neglect a friend. And I actually saw this. My father, when living in America, would travel back and forth from Brooklyn to Philadelphia and back, and he was already in his 80s, very, very frail, to make a minyan for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and Simchat Torah, for a group of 8 people, 8 older gentlemen in Philadelphia. Imagine traveling back and forth from here to Beersheba, back and forth like that, to make a minyan for someone. Outrageous. But that is the Pamach mentality. And that is the mentality that made 48. And imagine that together. We teach this to the young people today, what we would do. And they would hear the stories and see the spirit. We'd revive the 48 youth and carry on the torch towards the future with that same mentality. Is it possible to do such a thing?
I actually think that there is a direct line between the 48 youth and today's youth. Um, everyone before October the 7th, everyone was talking about the jaded young people, the spoiled, the TikTok generation. All they care about is rave parties and, the Tel Aviv nightlife and so on. And then October the 7th happened, and they were amazing.
Amazing.
They were true lions, one by one, in different ways. During October the 7th and afterwards, in serving in the army and fighting and being willing to sacrifice their everything and their lives for this country and for their fellow brothers and sisters. I do think that reviving those stories is important. I think it's important that they also, especially now, after October the 7th and after all the heroism that we have experienced, right, that they understand that as unique as they are, they're also part of the national ethos and the history of this people. This is what we are made of. This is the fabric. We defend our people, we defend our borders, we defend our tribe, and we defend our brothers and sisters. I think that can be that would give them also a tremendous sense of pride and sense of a belonging. Teaching those stories and impersonalizing them, bringing them closer to the generation today is extremely important. And I think we have an opportunity because now, because of everything that we experienced here, it feels so real. It feels like something that every one of us can identify with, not something that is part of a distant history that happened, 75 or 80 years ago, and this part of the stories that our grandparents tell us. The same is with the Holocaust, right? Not that I'm comparing the numbers or the magnitude of the tragedy, but I do compare the feeling that we had and the fear that October the 7th sent across the country and across the the global Jewish community. And I think it is ours to connect these dots and use it as a learning experience to say us today, just like them back then, and then to tell individual stories, because it is the story of each person that makes the difference, sometimes more than the collective story. It's an example of that individual heroism, or leadership and so on. And I think there's no better time in the Jewish history, in the modern Jewish history, than now to connect the dots.
It'd be tremendous. If we could do that, adopt, let's say it's October 7th, adopt someone from the Holocaust, and October 7th also adopt someone from the 48 youth. It'd be incredible.
Yeah.
First of all, gratitude for those who came before us. That's one thing.
But it's not just it's interesting that you say that. It's not just in terms of what we did and how we reacted and the individual or collective leadership and heroism. It's also the circumstances. There's nothing new under the sun. The history repeats itself, and most certainly the Jewish history. And there's also nothing new about the hatred that we are experiencing now and the anti-Semitism. Zionism is racism, was not invented after October the 7th.
Right.
The slur that Zionism is, or the Israel is an apartheid, was not invented after October the 7th. I could take you to the Soviet Union, right? And anti-Semitism during the Soviet Union, and you will have seen each of these lines and propaganda that were used back then. the anti-Semitic tropes and the blood libels, they change their rope, meaning today they'll say that we perpetuated genocide or that we starved the Palestinians of Gaza, right, systematically, or that we steal their national resources. In the medieval times, they accused us of, using the blood of the Christian children to bake matzahs and so on. I think drawing those lines is the best way to teach the history, but to teach how we can learn from history, because that is the real lesson. The lesson is not just memorizing history by heart, and nor is it for the sake of commemorating it. It is about learning from the history. How can we fight it better today, in a more informed way, in a more effective way?
You gave me an idea for the feature in the app that I want to do. Put a history feature in the app itself and see nothing has changed. It's the thing that would happen here. The apartheid was October 7th, before it was back in the 1990s. The idea of the bubonic plague and Christian was the same story in different times and so forth. So then all of a sudden the user will see themselves the history line, so forth, and that will give them a confidence, education, information, and a perspective, which is very important, because when you see a perspective, then all of a sudden your enemy is not all of a sudden that big giant enemy anymore. You're not scared of the enemy as well. So there's a lot of things we feature that.
Exactly, and it's exactly that. It's giving perspective, because you have a lot of young people, and not only young. You have a lot of people asking themselves the question: okay, but what do we do in Gaza? Are we being too aggressive? Are we taking the Palestinian lives and their security and so on into consideration? Should we do more in terms of humanitarian aid? Yes, we are. I have had conversations with my Jewish friends around the world who would say, yes, our fight is and our war is right, but, and then they basically repeat what they have been hearing, around them from mainly non-Jews, and I think learning from the history provides that perspective. It's like these were arguments already used against us, and you would not question any other people's right to defend themselves or a nation's right to defend its borders. Why do you do that only when it comes to Israel? And teaching also, teaching our people how to themselves identify anti-Semitism. I'm not sure that every Jew around the world knows that applying double standards to Jews or to Israel constitutes anti-Semitism today, according to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition on anti-Semitism that was adopted by the majority of democratic states around the world and the majority of academic and other institutions. I'm not sure that every Jewish fellow of yours and mine knows that blaming a Jew in Detroit or in Frankfurt for the policies made by the State of Israel constitutes anti-Semitism, right? Or calling them traitors for having dual loyalty and dual citizenship and so on. I'm not sure that everyone knows that. We are so focused on educating the elected officials in the countries right around the world, but I think that a lot of this education needs to take place also inside of our community. Just like Russell said, the majority of Jews haven't been to Israel. Russell was saying that the majority of Jews around the world have never been to Israel. He was saying that the majority of the kids, the Jewish kids, are not in Jewish day school or in any kind of Jewish education necessarily. So I think we need to take these figures very seriously, but not as criticism, rather as a challenge. How do we bring the Jewish education closer to them? And then when they react to events here in Israel, to be less judgmental, because those they don't necessarily come, from malintent. Sometimes just because they don't know, right? Knowledge is power. And I think as the leaders of the Jewish community, we need to transfer and transmit that power, right? And spread the knowledge and educate.
Thank you so much for appearing on the show today, Olga. and they chair the Zionist movement, and also Russell, the head of the GNF. We discussed basically the hostage deal, how it's affecting us now, how it's affecting us in the future, how it will affect us in the future. But the main conclusion that we learned basically is the following, is the Jewish people are very, very unique. We are a people that is more than a people. We are a family. And within that family, we're able to give and present viewpoints that may be extreme, and yet we can still see the bond between each other. We've gone through 2,000 years of exile, coming back to our land, coming back to our nation, coming back to our very essence through our language and so forth. And there's so many things now that the Jewish people have to, again, revive. And it all comes down to basically one thing, education. Education, education, education. Education can be done through different means, the mediums, the social media, apps, and so forth, virtual reality. But nonetheless, we, the leaders, have to step up to the plate. And we are the present leaders. And it's not the people, it's us. If we don't step up to the plate and realize that we have to take care of the sheep, so to speak, as Moshe Rabbeinu did, he took care of the sheep no matter what, until the very last breath that he had, providing care and love. And October 7th was a horrible moment. And the 15 months were also very horrible, not only because of the tragedies that happened, and also because of the hostages that were taken, and the waiting and so forth, but also how the world put us in the situations of a Sophie choice. That we had to choose between that and this, between a loved one and another loved one. What should we do, what we shouldn't do? Present, immediate danger, or future danger? Should we free murderers on the street, or not free murderers on the street? What will be in the end? And still hated by people, not acknowledged for our very, very existence. I've been trying to say for the last 18 months, basically, that the UN has to recognize the tragedies done against the Jewish woman. And we as Jewish men have to stand up for the honor of our Jewish women. If we don't stand up for the honor of our Jewish women, why should the world stand up for the honor of our Jewish women? That being the case, it comes down basically again to education of the idea of Jewish honor, Jewish love, Jewish commitment, the Jewish ideals and morals. But more importantly than all of that is the knowledge that we're here to stay, that we've been here from the beginning, and we are the nation of the world that came from the nations of the world. Our ancestors were two non-Jews who created the Jewish world, and they never looked back, and we can't look back either. We have to continue with our historical mission to bring the light onto the nations, and we will succeed on one condition, that we are honest with ourselves to our destiny. And thank you so much for Olga, and for you also, Russell, because you are continuing that destiny. And may we all reach our destiny, become leaders within this great nation, continue the story of the Jewish people. From this point on, let October 7th be known not as a day of tragedy, but a day of the reawakening of the Jewish spirit. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for these words.
Thank you all. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Laila
thank you.
Tov.
Laila Tov.